All right. Evening, everyone. Please be seated. Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Training Teacher Certification course. I'll be your teacher for this evening. I hope everyone's had a wonderful week and are doing what you can to stay hydrated and beat the heat. We have 107 here in Texas and, wildfires and everything else. So it's kind of crazy. And we haven't even gotten into summer yet. We're technically still in spring, but I expect a wild ride for the rest of the year. But at least in here, we can learn to put into practice cool thoughts, right? If only cool thoughts could make us physically cool, that would be great. But they do make us cool in regards to how we control our behavior. And that's the goal of what we're going to continue in this evening in this unit, which is Unit 3 of self-control. And we're picking up in Chapter 4, picking up where the previous teachers, Chris got us started, and then William left off last class on page 99. And we're talking about applying self-control to interaction and communication. Now, take all of these things into consideration. Hopefully, if you're just joining us for the first time, we have covered 2 units already prior to this one, the character unit and the acceptance unit, and 3 chapters prior to this in this self-control book. But just to kind of give you a little rundown again, in case we do have any any newbies, and we encourage you to go back, rewatch the information. These classes are posted on the official Peaceful Solution website on Facebook. Obviously, if you're watching us now, you know that. But we encourage you to go back and rewatch the information. You can download the books, the PDFs of the books that we have covered and are in currently. And you can follow along with the classes in those books, download them onto a tablet. And, a lot of times the tablets enable you to make notes, do highlights, underline, put little references and so forth in there. If you have the opportunity and can print them out, which many, many people do, they'll print out a copy of the book, and then they're able to actually physically make notes and then cross-reference and tie things in from one chapter to another, one lesson to another, or one book to another. And that makes the class, the learning more exciting and easy to recall things in your mind, especially when you're able to cross-reference different portions. Because as you'll learn, as you have seen, many of the things are reiterated, but they are reiterated in a way that applies to the particular lesson. Because the things that are taught are common to everyone in society. They're common. The characteristics, that's what I'm talking about, referring to. The lessons on developing positive character traits, the things that people encounter in society, they go through. That's common across the board. It doesn't matter if you're from the United States, if you're from the continent of Asia, South America, if you're from the land down under, wherever, right? Where you have people, you're going to have situations where there's conflict of interest, as we're going to talk about here. You're going to have situations where people have different combinations of character, either positive, mostly it's a combination of both positive and negative, but some might have predominantly more positive character traits, while others might have predominantly more negative character traits. Well, that doesn't make a person necessarily evil because they might have a predominant amount of negative character traits. That just means that they have not been taught yet the importance and established the value in their mind of why they should learn, develop, right, value, and practice the positive traits. Once a person sees the value in these things, they're going to want the benefits, the rewards that come with life, which requires them to make changes in their heart and their mind, okay? And it kind of creates a craving, kind of like I like to use the analogy, at least when I was younger, and I got to that point where I wanted to be a little bit stronger, I would work out. I had some weights, or I had some push-up bars or whatever. And as I started to see those little results coming from that exercise, I wanted to do it more, right? Well, we're not talking about building of a arm muscle or a leg muscle or anything like that. We're talking about building the character muscle, the muscle in your mind and your heart, right? And so as you start to see these results, you're going to crave it more, which means you have to study more, which means they have to seek it out and they have to put it into practice, because it's more than just studying these things. In order for it to be solidified in the heart and the mind of both us and the students we teach, we all have to put it into practice. And that brings about, it kind of like puts the wax seal on bringing about the changing of the heart and the mind. The person can read day and night, but if they don't practice those things, it's pretty much useless to them, okay? And that's why it's necessary that, yes, we do have to interact and work around different people. We have to be in, I'm not saying we should put ourselves in dangerous situations where we know someone is going to be disrespectful. I'm going to go walk down a dark alley because I know this is where all the gangbangers hang out, and I want my opportunity to practice self-control, right? No, that's risk-taking behavior right there. No, I'm not talking about doing that, but you can't isolate yourself from society and say, I'm going to become the best person that I can be by eliminating all of these negative people around me. That don't work that way, right? How do you get to put what you've learned to the test if you don't have to put it into practice? Okay, and there's going to be situations where even people who are learning these same things are going to do things or say things to step on your toes, to maybe offend you, to rub you the wrong way or whatever. And you're still going to have to put forth what you've learned and remind your students to put forth what you've learned in the peaceful solution. Never let your guard down. There should never be a reason that we should let our guard down. In fact, we should be on guard and setting our mind in advance, like we learned in the chapter in the book on character, right? And also what we've learned in here as well. So these things are important to hold fast in the mind of both us, because remember, as teachers, we are also students, but we also are expected to set the example, right? We're expected to set the standard, the pattern for our class, because the students are going to look to us for what to do. I mean, if your student was taking a shop class and they got into a situation like, say, they were doing carpentry or metal work or welding or something like that, and they got into a difficult situation or something occurred and maybe a machine bound up or something stopped working, what are they going to do? They're going to look to the teacher to find out how to solve that problem. All right, so we're talking about problems that arise as a result of a conflict, mostly, a lot of times because of personality, but also because of character differences. All right, so chapter 1 in this book talked about self-control starting with us, and it laid the foundation for what character is, of course, but how it relates, how in practicing self-control we can develop a positive character. We talked about different traits that are also developed and how they can't be developed without this character trait of self-control. We talked about guarding our mind, being our best critic and not our worst critic, and showing the difference between positive and negative options, and that every single person has a choice, right? And in every situation, you always have a choice. It might seem like you're left without a choice, but that's when you have to take the time to stop and think. What are my options, right? There's always an option, a peaceful option to every circumstance that a person might go through. They just need to stop and think about it. And like it was been covered many times by all the teachers, I'm pretty sure, a negative choice should never should never be the option. We should never consider a negative option, because a positive choice or a right choice, remember, is one that doesn't bring harm to ourselves, others, or the environment. And then in chapter 2, we got to talking about controlling your emotions to your advantage. And there we started to kind of peel back a layer of the onion in regards to self-control and how it really starts to affect many aspects of our life. We talked about how what emotions are, how they can build you up, how they can wear you down, how even if you don't practice self-control with positive emotions, you can bring about consequences for yourself, okay? We talked about impulsive reactions and irrational behavior, and the things that can lead to that. We gave the students in that chapter a diagram to help them to remember to practice self-control. And also in chapter 3, which was the one prior to the one we're in tonight, we talked about First, we talked about emotions in general, showing the difference between what they are and positive and negative. Then we got into this nice juicy one here that everybody seems to encounter at one point of time in their life or another. Anger. Control your anger. And of course, all these things are applied with this whole book and the lesson of self-control. Brought out some facts about anger, how anger can hurt. The sequences of anger, the triggers and so forth that get that anger sequence to flowing, to start, right? A trigger is something that starts a process. Anger styles, right? I never heard about anger styles until I really started learning the peaceful solution. I didn't know there was a style to anger, right? The withdrawal, the attack, and the displacement. Okay, there are three types of anger styles. We talked about how a student can control their anger using self-control, controlling your thoughts, recognizing the feelings, recognizing the triggers that anger you start to experience that anger, the physical things that you might start to feel as a result, which are cues, anger cues. Remember, we talked about that as well, to get the person to start to recognize, okay, all right, something's going on here, something I'm not agreeing with. Somebody said they did something reminded me of something, whatever the trigger might be. I've got to take the time to step back from this situation and kind of collect myself, regain my thoughts, because when you're not in control, you don't have, it's like your marbles, right? You're losing your marbles. If you ever, many people who play with marbles, I think a lot of us older ones did back in the day, you dump all your marbles out, they go rolling all over the place, right? And you have to go back and you have to collect them and put them back in the container. Well, that's the same thing we have to do with our thoughts and our emotions. We have to collect ourselves. And so then we talked about also in there appropriate ways to deal with anger, right? We didn't encourage the student or tell the student that anger was bad, don't do it, don't have it. No, anger it's a natural emotion, right? It's although classified as a negative emotion, it doesn't mean that a person is bad because they become angry, right? Also, anger being a secondary emotion. It's just they need to learn how to respond when they're experiencing it. Okay, and of course, the more we learn and we practice these things, potentially the less you will become angry, because you won't, things won't bother you as much. You'll keep things in perspective, right? Kind of like when they talked about taking things and keeping them in perspective. You look at a lot of times when you're younger, sometimes even when you're older, a person who might have, a pimple on their forehead. Right? It might seem like that's the end of the world. I remember one time I had to go to an event and I was going to meet some of my friends and we were going to be camping for a while. And I remember before I left, on my way out that morning, I woke up and I had 2 pimples right on the front of my head there. Looked like horns, Just I'm thinking, oh man, I cannot believe this. This is I'm thinking about hats to wear, and but the hats hurt to wear because the pimples were big and they were red, and it was just horrible. Eventually, I just was like, well, they're probably going to call me like all types of, goat man and all types of things. But there was nothing I could do about it. I knew, I didn't think about it at that time, but as an adult, now I think, well, pimples come, pimples go, right? If I would have kept it in perspective, I would have realized, this is probably like an inconvenient setback, but it's not the end of the world. Those little things are like grains of sand compared to all the grains of sand on the beaches of the whole earth. The only problem is when you don't keep those things in perspective, that one little grain of sand is like a grain that's in your eyeball. Have you ever had a grain of sand in your eyeball? Boy, can it be irritating, right? And so it irritates you like that until you get that thing out, and then you're able to see clearly and not have the problems. Well, that's what keeping it in perspective brings to the mind of the student. And of course, in our chapter today, applying self-control to interactions and communications. And everything, as you'll see, in taking these courses, everything that you see, it just flows beautifully from one lesson to the other. And that's why it's encouraged at the very beginning of every book not to skip the lessons. Take them as they're lined out, because it can be very easy to miss a very important point that when you get further along in your book, it might not make very much sense to the student. And you know what you're going to have to do? You're going to have to go back and revisit that point and build up to it again. So don't skip over anything, even if it might be tempting. All right. So let's, we're going to be picking up on page 100 today. William left off on page 99. We're going to go back and look at 99 a little bit there. But let's go back to the lesson plan first, just to remind everybody where we are in our lesson plan. And that's the gray tabs in your book there. If you just now downloaded the book, it'll be page or lesson plan 4, page D. Those are the little gray tabs, and that's for the teachers. And we're going to look at procedure 7. And it says here, explain to students that as unique individuals with our own likes and dislikes, and of course, William brought this out in the previous class, those likes and dislikes, they relate to personality, right? Not character, but personality. Personality, our likes, our dislikes, our attitudes, our social skills, and so forth. We will experience some conflicts with people, such as our friends and those in authority. This is one reason why self-control is needed when we communicate with others. And as was covered in the previous classes, communication is done in many different ways. The most popular, of course, being, or most common being oral and written, okay? But, there's sign language and braille and many other things nowadays as well. Have students read the sections entitled Poor Communication Can Lead to Disrespect. And that was the section that William covered last class. And that's found on pages, Poor Communication Can Lead to Disrespect and Conflicts and Authority. And that's found on pages 99 through 103. Have them do the respective exercises, which we'll cover this evening. Stress that self-control is needed for respectful communication. Okay, respectful communication, not just communicating. Remember the things that are necessary for communication, not just communication, but for communication to be successful, you have to have a speaker and someone who is willing and able to listen and to receive the information. Okay, like the previous teacher brought out, if someone's willing but not able, or able but not willing, then you don't have a scenario of successful communication. And in situations where it involves an authority figure, now I underline this one here because we've seen these scenarios come up as well, and we've even had these questions posed by students who ask, well, what about this? When an authority figure, teacher, parent, whoever it might be, conducts themselves in this way. Okay, and this is what it says. It involves an authority figure taking advantage of their position. Note what we're given to instruct the student. They should continue to use self-control to interact as respectfully as possible. Now, that doesn't give them an out. That doesn't give them an out to say, I held on as long as I could, and then I had to go ahead and just curse them out. I just had to curse them out, But I did it as long as possible. I think 10 seconds. But I'm getting better. It used to be 8 seconds. No, as long as possible, or interact as respectfully as possible. And remember, like we said, sometimes it's necessary to just walk away. Now, of course, we covered in dealing with an authority, it's not always appropriate to walk away, okay? But as we're going to talk about here, as you look at that last sentence, however, they should inform a caring adult as soon as possible so that the situation can be dealt with appropriately. And even in the student, informing an adult about a person who might be an authority that is using their position, abusing their authority or abusing their power, as it said, maybe even being immoral in their interaction with the student, that is actually showing respect to that teacher, because they're looking to get the teacher the help that they might need. Because, hey, face it, right? Just because a person is in a position as a teacher, does not necessarily mean that they have been educated in the lessons on how to develop and practice morality. Okay, unless they've been trained in these things, they're not going to have that. And that's why it's also important for the student who is learning these things to keep all of that in perspective, right? Because that'll go through their mind. Well, it's possible they haven't learned these things yet, right? But I have learned them, and I have been taught how to conduct myself. So I'm going to conduct myself in a way that is appropriate and respectful. And who knows, possibly even by my actions, the teacher might recognize something that they are or not doing appropriately. Not that that's your goal, but they could see that, right? By the student being a positive example to the teacher. Okay, so let's look back to page. Well, we're going to be picking up on 100, but let's just look back to 99 to get that last piece of what William covered in the last class, because they really just kind of flow right into one another here as we get into this exercise. Let's look at that second to last paragraph under poor communication can lead to disrespect on page 99. And it says here, even though we are all unique individuals with various opinions and values, we can learn to coexist peacefully. The key is, now notice here, the key is to treat others respectfully even when we disagree, even when there's a conflict, right? Even when there's something that somebody does or says that you don't like. That doesn't give you justification to let go of your emotions, right? No longer have control over yourself, over the words that come out of your mouth or the actions that proceed from your person. That doesn't give you the justification or allowance to do so. We must continue to practice self-control, even when we disagree. Learning how to communicate our opinions, needs, and feelings effectively will help us avoid conflicts that lead to disrespect, hurt feelings, and loss of friendship. All right, so let's just turn back to page 90 again. I want to refresh my memory and the memory of those who might be watching, and your memories too, on communication. Let's look back to page 90 at the very top there, under what exactly is communication. And this was read in the previous class, and we'll read it again, and it'll probably get read the next class too. To communicate means to convey knowledge, and William did a great job in giving the definition of that convey, knowledge or information, or even something from one point or one place to another. A knowledge, information, thoughts, or feelings in a way that is satisfactorily received or understood. All right. If you look down a little bit further there, it says communication is the most important aspect of building relationships with others, right? You can't build a relationship. Remember, a relationship is the way in which we relate to other people. Okay, how do you relate to other people? How can you relate to other people if you never talk to them, right? Excuse me. How would you know the things you have in common? Your likes, your dislikes. If a person has a positive or a negative character, if you never interacted with them, if you never communicated with them, you wouldn't know, right? It'd just be like looking at that nice, shiny tool that's sitting on display at the store, but never interacting with it and not knowing as a result that it is a display model only and has absolutely no guts, no parts inside. It can't do anything for you, but boy, does it look great, right? You have to use it. You have to communicate. You have to interact with things and people to know if they're beneficial for you or not. Look down to, did you hear what I just said underneath that heading there? It says, for communication to be successful, there must be a speaker and a listener. One person must give information, and the other must be willing and able to receive the information. All right. And very important sentence that comes after that. Both aspects of communication, the giving and receiving, require self-control. And we're getting ready to go over a scenario here where two people chose not to practice self-control in their communication with one another. So let's look over here. Let's look down that last paragraph on page 99 there before we go to page 100. Exercising self-control and speaking and listening to others can help us resolve many conflicts peacefully. Communication that lacks self-control has the potential, right? It has the potential. It doesn't have to, you know, turn into physical, as we read here. It could potential to turn into verbal or physical abuse. It doesn't have to turn into physical or verbal abuse, but the potential is there, right? Because where respect is lacking, these things flourish. You know, the potential to be abusive with your mouth, the potential to be abusive with your fist, your fist, or anything else. But a person doesn't have to be that way. It all depends on the individuals, right? As to the outcome of this and how they choose to respond in any given situation where disrespect or a conflict arises. So let's turn over to page 100 here, because we're going to look at some scenarios. And this is something that, you know, as a teacher, it's a great opportunity to give your students the kind of ability to stretch their legs, so to speak, in their creativity. Occasionally, in some of these scenarios, and you got to kind of be careful how you pick your students, choosing them carefully to sometimes act out some of the scenarios, because it just makes it a little bit more lively and exciting for the class, right? But you want to be careful, because you don't want to choose somebody who's been vindictive and somebody who's emotionally, gets very emotional to act out something like this, because it can go very wrong pretty quickly. Okay, so in this situation, you might just want to go through reading it, right? Doing a role play, choosing a person possibly to be Karen and a person to be Anne. And so at the very top on page 100, it says conflicts where each person selfishly, all right, only thinking about themselves, tries to get his or her opinion heard without regard for the other person's feelings can result in verbal and physical aggression. Now remember, there's a key word there, can. It can. It doesn't mean it has to, but it can. It depends on the individuals. Hopefully, you've got at least one person there who is willing, just like communication, they have to both be able, what makes them able, what makes the person able, right? They have the knowledge to be able, right? In order to practice self-control, in order to be able to practice self-control, you have to have the knowledge on what self-control is and how to apply it. Now, willing is a whole nother topic right there, because I've encountered many people who were able to practice self-control, who had the knowledge of what self-control was, but they weren't willing to put it into practice. Okay? Maybe because this person, they really didn't like that person anyway, so that was the excuse they gave themselves. Or maybe it was a bad day. They were having a bad day. Okay, whatever the case might be, they gave themselves an excuse, a way out to lose control instead of practicing self-control. So it doesn't have to be, right? We should always strive, even if we have little weaknesses now. Even if our students, as you might, interact with your class, and you can, as a teacher, if you're paying attention. You should be seeing the growth of your students. You should be seeing them come along, because this is how the success of these lessons are measured in behavioral changes. And those are things you can see with your eyes. You don't have to guess at it, right? You don't necessarily have to give your student a quiz on a piece of paper, because I know a lot of people that are great at just taking tests. I mean, some people just have, I guess you could say, common sense on answering questions. But that doesn't mean that they understand the concept and are diligently putting it into practice in their lives, right? So as a teacher, you have to know your audience. You have to pay attention to your audience and see them as they're growing, as they're overcoming, as they're remembering, because they might stumble and then catch themselves and remember, oh, yeah, that's right. I have to be mindful of my thoughts. I need to stop and think. I shouldn't be impulsive with what I say, or how I act. And that's a positive thing right there. Even if a person falls and they get back up and they recognize where they made a bad choice or where they made a mistake, and they put forth the effort to do better next time, that's growth, right? That's overcoming, right? So we should encourage them in those things. So, so that says these things can result in verbal and physical aggression. And so here, the scenario we'll get into here, it says the following scenario is typical of what occurs when neither party uses self-control in a conflict. And we've got two parties here, two characters in this scenario, Karen and Anne. And we'll get started here. We have Karen. You see she storms into the room, looking at her sister with a scowl on her face as she yells, "Why did you spill water all over my report?" Well, Anne, yelling back, "You must be crazy. I didn't spill any water on your report. Shut up and stop yelling at me. No, you shut up. You started yelling at me first. I'm not going to stand here and let you yell at me. I'm telling Mom. Go tell Mom. Tell her you started it too." Typical in anybody's household. You know, I think we've probably heard that growing up, or possibly been a party of it growing up as well. So let's look at this below here, underneath the scenario. And it says here, neither Karen nor Anne practiced self-control when they communicated with and interacted with each other. Okay, because in their interactions, if you have your book there, you can see even the body language that's being presented by, kind of guessing Karen's the one on the left possibly. The body language that's presented is one of accusatory in nature. And if you even look at Anne, you know, she kind of has a defensive stance, like, you know, why are you coming at me like this? So you can even see, even if you didn't know this scenario or just hear this being read, you could at the very least look at that picture and tell by their interaction that there's a conflict. Okay, and this is all a part of communication as well. This is all a part of interaction. Our body language, our tone of voice. You can look at both of their faces and it doesn't look like they're, you know, joyful, right? Facial expression and so forth. So all of these things play a part in how we communicate with one another. Notice here it says they both reacted impulsively, not considering the consequences, not considering the feelings of the other person, and did not stop to think about how their words and tone of voice would affect each other. Now, we saw in this scenario that it wasn't a situation where it de-escalated, instead it escalated, right? Because one person tried to outdo or express their point or their opinion in the matter greater than the other. So let's look at the two questions there. Can you identify the conflict? Well, it's pretty easy for us because we've got the book, but this is what you would ask your students if they can identify the conflict that was there between Karen and Anne. And of course, some of the answers might be Karen found her report. Now notice here, Karen found her report with water spilled on it and assumed that Anne was responsible. Number two here, how do you know that neither Karen nor Anne used self-control? Well, of course, neither Karen nor Anne used self-control because they were both yelling at each other, right? And if this was a video or a picture, you probably would see all the other body language that went along with it. We can at least see one person pointing at the other person, and then in an argument situation, that's a pretty accusatory gesture, right? You know, you did it, you did this. I know you're the one that broke this, or you're the one that spilled water on my report. Okay, and that's pretty accusatory in nature. And we're going to look at something here pretty soon. Let me see here. Where is that at? Yeah, okay. So we have that scenario, and then we have those two questions there, which you can give to your students. Get as much feedback from them as you can. You know, again, pick their minds on it. You know, like Chris was saying before, don't just take a yes or no answer. Try to dig a little bit deeper to garner the understanding that they have, to see if they're really grasping these lessons and understanding the concepts as they have been presented. All right, so let's look over here to page 101. Under let's take a closer look. It says here, conflicts can start for many reasons. All right? Conflict, we've all gone over that over and over and over, disagreement between two or more people, such as accusing someone wrongfully or jumping to conclusions. Accusing someone wrongfully or false accusations. And we've seen many instances on the news, on social media. Even it's come across where there are programs, initiatives that have been started by attorneys and so forth, groups, nonprofit organization groups and so forth, to try to exonerate people who the system wrongfully accused, right? And a lot of these, mostly men, but I'm sure probably some women too, they spend many years incarcerated, only to find out through DNA evidence and possibly the testimony of a false witness turning out to find out that it was false, that person didn't do anything. They had nothing to do with that crime, but yet they suffered a consequence for something that they didn't do. They suffered a consequence from someone else's immoral actions. And this is how that ripple effect can spread out. That's why the things we do, they don't just stop with us. We have to be mindful that our actions, impulsively, or doing it in an accusatory nature, whatever the case might be, out of anger, lying out of anger and saying, this person did this or did that, right? They can affect other people, and not just that person, but that person's life. Think about a father or a mother who is falsely accused and then they're sent to prison, right? Well, did they get pulled out of somebody else's life? A father that takes care of his family and provides the resources to keep a roof over his family's head and food on the table and clothes on their back and heat in the wintertime and cooling in the summer, or whatever the case might be, or a mother who might do the same for her family. Okay, it's not just one person who is affected by these, wrongful accusations. It's many people that it reaches out and affects. I want to read you the definition of this word accuse here, because normally, and I haven't found anything that shows otherwise yet, and I'm not saying there's nothing out there, I just haven't yet, but normally this word is associated kind of with a negative connotation, right? Accuse. No one says this person is accused of doing a great job, right? This person is credited with doing a great job, right? You're usually accused of doing something wrong. And this is what we find in this definition of this word accuse here. This is a combination from Webster's and Cambridge. It says to charge. Now you think about this word charge, and we've probably heard it coming across the news and so forth. It says an accusation, typically one formally made against the prisoner brought to trial. Someone who is accused of a crime in the courts is called, we know what that's called, or that person's called, usually called a defendant, right? If somebody's being charged with a crime, or they're being brought to the courts and they're being charged with something, right? Whether it's resisting arrest, disorderly conduct, public intoxication, drinking and driving, they're being charged with breaking a rule, breaking a moral standard in society. So in the courts, though, when you think about that, when a person is charged, that person who is charged, when they go to trial or go to court, they are the defendant. The person who is putting these charges on them are usually the person that's the prosecutor. They're prosecuting that other person, whether it's an attorney or whoever it is, district attorney or the courts or whatever the case might be. But you think about that. When a person is accused wrongfully, they normally take a defensive stance to that accusation. They become defensive. And you can kind of see this in this scenario with Karen and Ann. Karen is charging Ann with the crime of getting water all over her report. Now, Ann is having to defend herself and her actions and saying, I didn't do this. So what does she say? Well, I'm going to take it before the judge, who in this case is mom, right? So this is kind of the scenario that we see played out. And if we kind of think about these things in this way, when we're interacting with other people or we witness some type of interaction, then we can kind of see the stance that needs to be taken in order to put the peaceful solution in there and fix it. So it says to charge with a fault or offense also means blame. Accuse also means to say that someone has done something morally wrong, illegal, or unkind. Okay, so simply put, someone has done something to break the rules when it comes to morality. Illegally would tie into the laws, right? Because the laws are just rules that govern society, or something that is unkind. In school, people used to be kind of very unkind to other people, especially if they were a new person. And when they were walking to their seat, sometimes they would stick their foot out and they would trip the person, right? Or pull their chair out from underneath them, okay? And that's very unkind because some people have been seriously hurt as a result of those things. They do it as a kind of joking, fun type of thing. But remember what we learned in the character unit, in the acceptance unit in regards to bullying. If you're the only one laughing, then it probably wasn't that funny, right? Probably not funny at all. Anything that could potentially hurt someone should never be joked at or laughed about. So it says here, conflicts can start for many reasons, such as accusing someone wrongfully, or notice here, jumping to conclusions. Let's just glance back at let's jump back to page 62 here, under jumping to conclusions. And we'll see here, I guess we'll just start at the top of that paragraph there. It says, insecurities can also lead to jumping to conclusions, insecurities that an individual might have within themselves. Like the example was given with the young lady and the girl standing at the water fountain laughing, but looking in her direction, but they weren't looking at her, right? Well, if she didn't have an insecurity, she wouldn't be worried about, well, I wondered if they're laughing at me, right? It could be very easy to jump to conclusions in a situation like that just because someone is looking in your generator. I've even done that before, not laughing at somebody, but I've kind of been kind of off in my thoughts thinking about somebody, and you're just kind of gazing ahead of you, and then you kind of come out of your thought and you realize you're looking right at someone, and you're like, sorry, I wasn't really trying to stare at you. I was I was not even thinking. I was not even thinking about looking at you. I was thinking about something else, and it can be very easy to do, and a person can think it's like I heard this actually came across the news. It was at a gym, and it kind of went viral because there was a visually impaired man who was actually legally blind. He was completely blind, but he was working out, and there was also a woman that was working out there. Well, the woman thought that he was staring at her, right? I mean, he's visually, he can't see. He's no eyesight, no nothing. A lot of times they'll wear sunglasses, but he didn't have anything on. And she came up to him and says, hey, I'm very uncomfortable. You need to stop staring at me. He's like, what are you talking about? I'm not staring at you. I'm blind. She went and got the manager and brought him back, and he brought out his card that shows that he is legally blind. And the manager even said, well, you need to stop staring at her. You're making her uncomfortable. It's like, how can you stare at somebody if you're blind? He didn't even know she was over there, right? So it's very easy to jump to conclusion when you don't have all the facts. In this situation, these people were presented with facts, but I guess they didn't have the capacity to understand the facts once they were given to them, But it's in society, these things, they can go off without the slightest hitch, right? And even when you see things like in road rage, people think that somebody's driving and they looked at them in an angry way. Oh, this person's got a problem with me, Well, he's on the phone. You can't see the earbud in his ear. He's talking to somebody on the phone, and he's maybe having an argument with a coworker or a friend or whoever, and he just occurred to glance over him. Oh, this guy must want to start something, So he pulls out his side piece and flashes it to him. It's like, how is that bringing about a peaceful solution? And these are adults in society. How much more do we expect our young people, our young men and women, to respond rationally when as adults we have those same problems? Well, this is why character education is so vitally important in all aspects of society, from the very youngest to the very oldest. So we see here, jumping to conclusions simply means arriving at a false belief a false belief due to a lack of accurate, truthful information. And remember, like William brought out, true facts and false facts. You can't believe the first thing you hear because that might be wrong information. It might be misinformation. They have to deal with that so much in social media nowadays that they actually have whole groups dedicated to finding and bringing out misinformation presented in the news, right? Fact checkers, they call them fact checkers. Okay, I know NPR, National Public Radio, has a group of fact checkers that they'll investigate certain stories. They'll bring it up and they'll have their investigators go and kind of get the facts. So we want to be careful that we don't arrive at false beliefs due to a lack of accurate, truthful information. Now look a little bit further down in that sentence. It says, that paragraph, it says, in order to control your anger, it is very important to keep things in perspective. Sometimes what you choose to be angry about might not be what it appears to be. And then look at the last sentence in the second paragraph. And this was given the example about the person laughing at the poster on the wall. It says, if you had taken the time to gather the facts, and that's why it's so vitally important, and we reiterate this over and over, and we should reiterate this over and over as teachers to our students, get the facts, educate yourself, find out as much as you can before you make a decision. Even a decision to, think that your friend did this or that, or a person did this or that, find out first. Are they really doing that? Are they even directing their laughter or their looks? Are they even directing them at you? It might be possible they got inaccurate information. Now, if you respond based on their misinformation, how are you bringing about a peaceful solution? You can't. All you're going to do, all the student's going to do is add fuel to the fire, and then it's going to grow into a greater conflict, and then people are going to be pouting, tripping over their lip because it's hanging over so low at the end of the day, at the school day, right? That's why education is so important, and we encourage it consistently, not just reading, writing, math, but just these everyday moral choices that have to be made, right? Just, asking. The simple three-letter word of asking can eliminate so many problems. If you had taken the time to get the facts, gather the facts, you would have found out they were laughing at a funny poster that was tacked directly behind you. So back over to page 101 here. So by using self-control and choosing your words carefully. Now, have you ever gone through your closet and chose an outfit to wear, or chose a pair of shoes, or you're working on a project and you had to choose the right tool to use for that project? If you're dealing with nuts and bolts, you have to choose the right socket. Some people, they just amaze me. They're like, oh yeah, that's 5/16. Yeah, that's a 10 millimeter. Oh yeah, that's 22 millimeter. Here I'm like, nope. Oh, too small. Oh, too big. I always seem like to not have the right tool. But when you're sitting there looking at that toolbox, you have to think about what is the appropriate tool in order to get this job done, right? In the proper way. Well, it's no different with our interactions and our communications with others. We have to choose our words carefully, which requires us to stop and think. As difficult as it might be, in our fast-paced society where everybody wants everything instantly, it takes a lot of self-control, determination, discipline to stop and think. And that could be as fast as 3 seconds, right? It doesn't take that long to stop and think. But people tend to act impulsively on emotions. Well, that's where we go back to chapter 2 and chapter 3 to bring that back into the mind of the students and say, no, you can't act on emotions. Your emotions are there. Your emotions are beneficial. They're important. They let you know how you feel about certain things. You like it, you don't like it, right? But they're not the governing force in how you are to respond in your communication and interacting with others. You can explain why you are upset. Okay, so these are things you can do in practice by using self-control and choosing your words carefully. You can explain why you're upset, and notice here, like I just said, ask questions that will help you get the facts you need to resolve the conflict. Were you guys laughing at me? Oh, no, it wasn't you. You were standing right in front of that poster right there. We were already looking at that and talking about that. Oh, okay. I thought you were laughing at me, right? just by asking. You see how that resolved the conflict immediately? It resolved it before it even became any bigger. Okay, yeah, there's a conflict in their mind, so technically, but it didn't grow into one with the other person or persons. For example, here going back to Karen and Ann, Karen could ask. She could ask, and if she knew how her report got wet. So you see here now, it becomes now, and you still have to be careful. You have to be careful even in how you ask. You know, do you know how my report got wet, Ann? Right? You can ask in an accusatory way, right? Even in well, I asked, yeah, but you asked in an accusatory way, like you already had an answer, and you're just trying to squeeze the facts out of her. You try to force her to tell you what she wants you to hear, right? Or you could ask, man, Ann, my paper's wet. I just left for a minute. Would you know how it got wet? Yeah, now she's not going to be in on defensive. No, I wasn't. I wasn't even in the kitchen. And we're going to see here what she saw a little bit later. Maintaining a respectful tone of voice and asking questions rather than accusing can help to resolve conflicts. Remember, when you're accusing somebody, you're actually charging them with an immoral or illegal act. It's kind of like what you're doing. Okay, you're saying that they did something wrong. You're saying that they broke the rules. Okay, and that's what you're doing when you're in a accusatory state. By getting all the facts rather than jumping to conclusions, you can avoid conflicts. Okay, and of course, getting the facts even that requires self-control, right? Because it's like we said, it's easy to impulsively go and want to jump to conclusions. It's easy to go, well, see, it's me. Mom's upstairs. Nobody else is here. Ann's the only other person here. She must have did it. She's always knocking over stuff anyway. Even if a person has a reputation of, maybe always knocking over their cups, that doesn't mean that they knocked over that cup at that particular time on that report. That's why it's important that you get the facts. Because it might be that one time that they weren't even near that area. All right. So let's look at this challenge here. And this is a challenge that you would give to your students and to get their minds to thinking. Okay, we've got the scenario where it didn't go well and the two did not practice self-control. Now we're challenging the students' minds, having them draw off of what they learned here so far. Even the word challenge here, it means to arouse or stimulate, especially by presenting with difficulties, right? Like that Iditarod that they have up in, I don't know if it's in Alaska. I think it's in Alaska, where they have the the dog sled race. And they travel for miles and miles, and that's a challenge, right? I mean, that's a challenge for the dogs. It's a challenge for the humans. It's a challenge to climb Mount Everest or to run a triathlon, right? There's many difficulties that are presented physically, and it's mentally too. I mean, the person to do that, they have to have their mind, geared towards accomplishing a specific goal. Well, here's a challenge here. We're challenging the students to overcome this difficulty or to see this difficulty that Karen and Ann experienced and come up with a solution that would bring about a positive or a peaceful outcome. And it says here, rewrite the previous scenario to show Karen and Ann demonstrating self-control. Keep in mind that Karen, the one who came and started bringing forth the accusations, she jumped to conclusions. She didn't get the facts as to who spilled water on her report. As you rewrite the scenario, think about the questions Karen could ask that would help her get the facts. Hint, how could you use active listening to resolve the situation? And this is what you could present to the students. How could they use those active listening skills that we covered on the previous page here? We go back here to page 95. Reflecting what the speaker is feeling. Don't interrupt or change the topic or conversation until you're sure the other person has finished speaking. When you're active listening, use an appropriate amount of eye contact, right? And that doesn't mean, staring at your sister like that, but, use the appropriate amount of eye contact to let the person know that, you are considering what they're saying and you are paying attention. When you're talking to somebody and they're, head is up here and they're looking at that, or they're, got their fingers picking out stuff, their nails, that you pretty much got the impression that they have no interest in what you want to say. So, sometimes I'll be talking to people and I can see they're not paying attention, and I'll be talking out. So I say, you know what I mean? Yeah. There's no way you know what I mean. I just jumbled up a whole bunch of words. So that tells me they weren't really paying attention, so I just move on to something else. But having the appropriate amount of eye contact is very important. Lets the person know that you care. So we'll see here real quick. We've got a few minutes before we finish. I just want to make sure okay. Yes. All right. So you have Karen Ann. You see how they're alternating here, and so this would be the opportunity to have your students write in how they would respond if they were in the Karen's position, or how they would respond if they were in Ann's position. And of course, these here are examples to get their minds to thinking that can be used, but many answers might come from your students, so just kind of be aware of that. Some examples might be, I can't believe it, someone spilled water all over my report. Now you see in that, she's not accusing, she's just expressing her disbelief, right? Now notice here what we see here, and using these active listening skills, and reflected what she felt the speaker was saying. You seem really upset about it, okay? Yeah, I'm upset. Do you know how many hours I worked on this? Now I'm going to have to print it again, and the printer is out of ink. I remember seeing all the work you put into it. That must be really frustrating. Okay, so she's continuously reflecting what she thinks the speaker is feeling, but also kind of putting herself in her sister's shoes. Wow, if that was me and I worked on that and I found it got spilled, we don't have no more ink, right? I'd be pretty frustrated too. Okay, so she's putting herself in their shoes, and she's reflecting what she's feeling. And then it says here, do you know how the water could have gotten spilled on it? Could have spilled on it. So she's asking a question here, asking her sister in order to get facts. And her sister says, no, but I saw the cat in the kitchen before I came upstairs, right? Probably broke in the house and, got it on the counter and knocked the cup over. So in that way, they had a positive communication. They had a situation of positive communication. There was respect shown, mutual respect shown between the two. There wasn't any accusations being given. Therefore, there was no jumping to conclusions. And as a result, facts were gathered on both parties, right? And they can resolve it peacefully. So Karen can look into it a little bit further and find out, yeah, the cat was there because look right here, there's a wet paw print, or whatever the case might be. All right. And it totally squashes any conflict that might occur before it even starts. And that's why it's important that we take these things into consideration, and also remind our students to take these things into consideration. Stop and think before you act. Get the facts, right? And that can help reduce a lot and resolve a lot of conflicts that can arise as a result of negative, unhealthy communication and interaction. So we're going to pick up on page 102 for our next class, and our next class is going to be on 5/22 at 5:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next class.